Evening, everyone. Welcome. I'm just going to go over M's questions first because I get into trouble because I always miss them. And then we're going to actually discuss, to begin with, Liz Truss's lack of control, not over her party. That's gone. She can't even control a cabinet. But M, first of all, I said two questions. How is everyone? Probably very well. And the second thing is saying, I went to the shops and got some hot water bottles today in preparation for winter. We're hoping not to have to rely on heating too much due to the ongoing energy crisis. I'll tell you what I did. So last year I got from my partner a heated seat mat because she works from home for like 3 days a week anyway, which she loves. It's just like a heated mat, which just plugs in, quite low power, and it keeps your bum warm. And I also got for her recently a heated blanket, so when she's sat on the sofa in the dog's room, which again, so low. Basically, when there's not loads of you in the house, you obviously don't need central heat. You need central heating a little bit. You don't want your pipes to freeze. But if there's not many of you in and you're generally in the same room, there are low power options. So, and I'll be moving out of here. This is the conservatory. You won't be able to tell. I'll be moving inside, hopefully in a couple of weeks, actually. Hopefully in a couple of weeks. And then we won't have to have the heater on in here. And I'll just do the same thing. I'll probably just get myself, for when it's a bit nippier, just low power heating for like a person. You don't need the whole room heating. If you're always sat in a place, a heated blanket or something like that. And you don't need it on all the time. You just put it on for a half an hour or so and then you turn it off and it stays warm for ages. But yes, so let's start off. Studio style soundproof and doubles as wall insulated. I don't think there'll be any of that. No. No, because there'll be lots of things around. But we will see what happens anyway. But it's apparently I'm supposed to be excited. But I did tell my partner it's not exciting moving indoors. It's intriguing. Exciting is learning to juggle chainsaws, which I'm not going to do. But I thought we would start off because if you look at this, if we consider what has happened in the last week. Now, I want to just point out that when Liz Truss assembled her cabinet, she had a few options. She could have done what prime ministers so what Boris Johnson did is he just surrounded it with sycophants. So Johnson, even when he was losing control of his parliamentary party, he had the cabinet behind him. Because the one criterion for being in cabinet was that you backed Boris Johnson. So he surrounded himself with loyalists. Now, this isn't normally what you do. It's not what Theresa May did. It's not what David Cameron did. It's not what Gordon Brown did, Tony Blair, or any of the others. The normal procedure is, yes, you of course need a lot of allies in cabinet because cabinet has to speak with one voice. But there are various factions in a party. Any party large enough, even smaller parties have factions, but any party large enough to actually form a government in a first past the post system will have its factions, or indeed any system will have its factions. So you also want the leaders of those factions, unless they're completely determined to be rebels, in the cabinet as well. So you have a broad range of, and it works quite well. You do it for political reasons, but it works well because you have a broad range of views. And of course, they're going to disagree at times. But Liz Truss formed her cabinet not based on loyalty to her, which is just as well because no one's got any. It was based on loyalty to an ideology. Now, she put a couple in that maybe were slightly out of the way, like Tom Tugendhat, because he did well in the leadership contest, he went in. But by and large, the cabinet were those people who shared an ideology. They were either ERG members or those who were round about the same place on the political spectrum. So to have them now undermining her, disagreeing with her, it's a spectacular lack of discipline that just shows how little control she's lost. Let's look at what's happened in the last week. So, at the top here, we've got, this is from the Financial Times yesterday. Truss overruled Kwarteng on number of UK investment zones. Now, Truss chose Kwarteng to be Chancellor. And this is actually the only normal appointment she made to Cabinet. She chose Kwarteng to be her Chancellor because they were both on the same page economically. And that's classic. That is actually what it's not what Boris Johnson did. Boris Johnson did the opposite. Boris Johnson chose his Chancellors on the basis of credibility, not Zahawi, but Javid and Sunak. For ex-bankers, knew the markets, so it was to inject some credibility into his cabinet, which he knew he was sorely lacking. Truss was a much more normal system, which is that someone who was on the same page as her economically, so there wouldn't be lots of arguments, right? And there are now arguments, and the reason, of course, is because since this mini budget, it's all gone to hell. A lot of, and Kwarteng will know this, a lot of MPs, because they know it's really damaging to get rid of the leader, never mind all the talk at the moment of plots, and I've even put it in a headline here, plots against Truss. The plots against Truss won't be imminent because it's incredibly damaging to get rid of your leader. So, in fact, if they get rid of her anytime soon, it will have taken longer to make her leader, because it was what? 2 months. It took 2 months for the leadership contest. So it will have taken longer to make her leader than to get rid of her. So they can't get rid of her just yet. You're probably talking next year. But what they want to do, what MPs want to do, is to put the blame on Kwarteng, get him sacked, give Liz Truss a clean slate to start again, reset. Kwarteng knows this. He's not happy, but Truss is completely loopy. Overruled Kwarteng a number of UK investment zones. The UK investment zones are not investment zones. Let's be honest, they're not. They're there as another tax break to corporations. That's what they exist for. That's all they're going to do. And the more of them they have, the more they're going to wreck tax revenues. Kwarteng is aware of this. Liz Truss doesn't seem to care. Let's get some comments before I go on to the next bit. Is it kind of reasonable that Liz Truss doesn't want to spend money on promoting lower energy use? Because if energy bills doubling even before cap doesn't give motivation, what on earth will? See, she says it's for or it's reported that she said it's for ideological reasons. It might be. But I'll tell you what's weird about this, right? Because her ideology it's almost like, and I've said this before, it's like she doesn't really share this libertarian. I'm not sure she really is a libertarian. I don't think she is, because it's like she wants to pretend she is, but she doesn't understand it. So let's jump across to this Jacob Rees-Mogg one, right? So down here, this in terms of the energy plan that you've just brought up, Jacob Rees-Mogg's department said public information campaign, give some people advice or tips on saving energy. Liz Truss has ruled it out for ideological reasons. Now, this is quite interesting because Jacob Rees-Mogg is your classic laissez-faire libertarian. He doesn't want the state to be telling people what to do. Why? Because he's incredibly rich and powerful. Of course he doesn't want the state telling him what to do. So, his plan doesn't do that. This is where Liz Truss, I think, is getting it. She's trying to be a libertarian, but she isn't, and she's not understanding it. It's like she's trying to pretend to be a thing, but she doesn't understand it. It's a bit like Sean Connery turned down the role of Gandalf for the Lord of the Rings films because he said he didn't understand it, which is a good reason to turn something down. But Liz Truss is trying to play this role that she doesn't understand, and she hasn't turned it down. So Rees-Mogg's plan, which was fairly sensible, was a public information campaign that gave people some advice on what they could do to either reduce energy use or smooth the energy use around the country. So, which times of day is it best to use certain things to avoid excessive load, to avoid massive pressure points in the day. So when are you off peak? Because financially, I don't think we pay peak and off-peak rates anymore. It's just a set. At the moment, I think it's now 34 pence per kilowatt hour of electricity. There used to be peak and off-peak rates. I don't think that exists now for domestic use. So you can't really tell. You're not being financially induced to do it at certain times then. So what are the times? That's all it is. It's advice. He's not compelling. It's not like the COVID lockdowns. They're not forcing people to behave in a certain way. It's just advice. So it perfectly fits the libertarian attitude. The government are providing advice. You can take it or leave it. But Truss doesn't get it. She talks about the nanny state. The nanny state is this idea of the state telling people what to do. It's not telling people what to do. So this is why I think Truss is trying to be a good little libertarian, but she doesn't understand how to be because she doesn't really believe it. And that's where I think this disconnect is. So, and she's pissed off Rees-Mogg twice now. So she's at odds with Rees-Mogg over this and another, I've put it in there, about his labour market reforms. And it might well be that his labour market reforms are absolutely stupid. But nonetheless, she's now, she's overruling him. Jacob Rees-Mogg thought, Liz Truss, great, we're finally going to get someone who's just going to let me do whatever. And now she's not doing. I mean, Jacob Rees-Mogg is a libertarian who believes the state shouldn't interfere. Well, the state is interfering with him because the Prime Minister's telling him as a cabinet minister, no, you can't. He's coming to her with policies. Oh, this is a fantastic policy. No, it's not. Don't be stupid. Oh, you're saying off-peak still exists, 20p night rate, 38. It's 34, I'm sure. But anyway, it varies across 30. Okay, fine. I didn't know that. How many people do know that then? I thought they'd gone away. Let's have a look. May's attempt didn't work, though. Admittedly, that's probably largely because she included Johnson. May's attempt didn't work for two reasons. First of all, so May's approach to her cabinet was to include a mix of people on both sides of the Brexit debate, but she didn't do it. So she put in there, the idea was half the cabinet would be Leave supporters and half would be Remainers. The problem is that some of the Remainers were pragmatic Remainers, like Sajid Javid. These are people who don't like the EU. They prefer the EU don't exist, but they recognise that it does exist and that if it does exist, the UK should be part of it rather than outside it. But that doesn't mean to say that they're not the sort of people that are going to argue strongly for membership. So it wasn't really balanced. It was what she did the Conservative Party is, or was at the time anyway, largely, Europhile might be putting it strongly, but largely in favour of being part of the EU. She created a cabinet that actually was tilted more towards the Eurosceptics. So she messed it up. But nonetheless, May's plan was still to have this balance in there. She just didn't balance it. There was no balance. She didn't balance it. But that was still the aim. She didn't try and just surround herself with like-minded people or people who would be utterly loyal to her. Because it doesn't work. It doesn't, Johnson, it didn't work for Johnson in the end, because if you lose control of the parliamentary party, then it doesn't matter that your cabinet keep coming out in favour of you. It's just that Truss can't even get the cabinet back in her. You say Sean Connery didn't understand the Gandalf role. Who on earth doesn't understand the Gandalf role? Well, it doesn't matter, does it? The fact of the matter is he read it, he didn't understand it, and he's turned it down. And people actually describe that as a really stupid move because it was a big film, but it's not a stupid move, actually. It was why would you pick a role that you don't understand? But I don't know why he didn't understand it. Funny how the term nanny state keeps getting tossed around as though the country ever was one. Also, again, it's just the term as well. I keep picking on this. It's the term nanny. I always say this. If it weren't for Mary Poppins, I wouldn't even know what a nanny is. No one's got any experience of a nanny. A nanny is someone that looks after the children of the extremely wealthy and privileged. Because you've got to think about it this way. So you have to be able to afford a nanny for your children, you have to be very wealthy. But also, to need a nanny, you need to be time poor. So who is there that's very wealthy but doesn't have time for their kids? There's only a certain section of society for which both those things apply, where the Venn diagram overlaps. People who are time poor but money rich, enough to be able to afford a nanny. So hardly anyone in this country has any experience. So just using the term, it doesn't get across something to ordinary people. Like, what is the nanny? What's a nanny? The nanny state? It makes no sense. It's an absolute nonsense. If we have a COVID spike, which we will, we don't have the NHS staff to cope. No, we'll have to employ thousands to come here and literally save us from ourselves. I don't even know what is going to be done about that. We're not going to get away with it this winter. It's an absolute madness. The NHS is already struggling. We're already getting reports of critical incidents at hospitals now, near me including, and I do not even know realistically what's going to happen. But this is another nightmare for the government, of their own making. But anyway, not to mention that May was undermined by Johnson from day one. Indeed, yeah. But I mean, this is what I take this to mean now as well. I think, see, look at when Johnson started to be undermined by his own cabinet. So for all Liz Truss claiming that she was a Johnson loyalist, she wasn't. From the new year, Liz Truss very pointedly was trying to attract attention. She was whining and dining Tory MPs, trying to drum up support. Why? Because she knew a leadership contest was coming. Rishi Sunak did the same. He was, probably because he's less experienced as a politician, he was none too subtle about it. Liz Truss was more subtle, but it was fairly obvious, even to me, an outsider, what she was up to. So Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, and Penny Mordaunt as well, but she was actually very subtle about it. All of them, from after that North Shropshire result last December, it was clear that Boris Johnson was finished. It was just a matter of what would be the tipping point and when. Some people thought North Shropshire would be the tipping point. It wasn't. Partygate wasn't. The fines weren't. The local elections weren't. You know, the thing that was in the end was turning a blind eye to sexual harassment in the party. That was what did it in the end. But it was, you know, it was coming. It was coming. So you think to yourself, Suella Braverman at the Tory party conference this week are odds over migration. She says she wants to... Liz Truss announces that she'll need to increase immigration to deal with the labour shortage. It's like, no kidding. Suella Braverman immediately goes to the Tory party conference saying she wants to cut net migration. In stark contrast with what the Prime Minister has stated. She's the Home Secretary. She's one of the most senior members of the Cabinet. And she is willfully briefing against the Prime Minister. It's just chaos. She has no control. You've got Penny Mordaunt saying that benefits should be linked to benefit increase should be linked to inflation. Liz Truss is saying it should be linked to wages. So Penny Mordaunt is undermining the Prime Minister. So, you know, the focus is on the rebels, the Tory rebels. Well, some Tory rebels will always be rebels, like Tobias Ellwood. He's just a rebel. Labour have their rebels that will just rebel. Doesn't matter what you do, doesn't matter what the party does, they're rebels. That's what they are. They're not really in tune with the party. They just rebel. You always have some of those. Obviously, I think there's backbenchers that aren't natural rebels that will rebel against Truss. But none of that matters because their own cabinet won't even back her. Jacob Rees-Mogg is in a nanny state. Well, Jacob Rees-Mogg still the nanny he had as a child, he still employs her. So Jacob Rees-Mogg, a man in his 50s, still has a nanny. I imagine she's really more like a personal assistant these days. But it's still the nanny he had when he was a child. What would be the difference with benefits aligned with either inflation or wages? Well, at the moment, wages are going up less than inflation, aren't they? So, you know, in theory, if wages were going up, if it was under Labour and wages were going up more than inflation, you wouldn't have inflation this high, of course. But if wages were going up higher than inflation, then it wouldn't be a problem. In fact, you would peg it to inflation, not wages. She's picking it because wages are going up about half of the rate of inflation. Now, there are people arguing, saying, well, why should workers get a lower percentage increase than people on benefits? And well, apart from the fact most of the people on benefits are workers, you could say, yeah, but the answer to that is not to squeeze people on benefits. The answer is to make sure people in work and they're not on benefits, because remember, the majority of people on benefits are still in work, make sure that they get better pay increases. you know, raise the rate of minimum wage so that it is a living, because they call it a living wage, the Tories. That was what the Tories did. Like when Boris Johnson claims that the Tories introduced the living wage. No, they didn't. Labour introduced the minimum wage. The Tories had the wizard idea of calling it the living wage. But it's the same thing, only it's not a living wage. Certainly not in the southeast of England. How can we push Starmer towards the PR? It seems he doesn't want it, even though party conference have voted for manifesto commitment. We don't know that he doesn't want it. We don't know that at all. I'm not saying I think he does. What I'm saying is we don't know that he doesn't. If he wanted PR, the way to push him to it is to push people to it. Bottom line is, if the target voters want proportional representation, Labour will want proportional representation. There are two types of Labour leader. There's the ideological leader and there's the pragmatic leader. The ideological leader, you won't push them towards anything they don't agree with ideologically. But they will also lose elections every single time. The pragmatic leader aligns themselves with the voters that they need to attract. And that's what Starmer is. So if Starmer isn't pushing something, it's because it doesn't, no matter what people may think, thinking empirically, it doesn't help. But I would say this. If Starmer is thinking to himself, yeah, proportional representation's a goer, he still won't announce it now. Why would you? I keep saying this. You do not announce it now. You announce it at the last possible moment. That if you announce it now, the right-wing press will spend the next 2 and a bit years trashing it. Absolutely trashing it. It'll distract Labour from the issues they want to talk about, because every time he goes on for an interview, they'll talk about electoral reform, which is not the voters' top priority. The voters' top priority is cost of living, energy crisis, wages, healthcare, education. It's not electoral reform. So it would completely derail their attempts. So you don't do it. You can do it late on. You can put it in the manifesto. And then they'll still ask about it during the election campaign. But by then, he'll have hopefully built up such momentum that he can answer those questions, dismiss them, be quite vague about them still, and get it back onto other topics. So it would be strategically inept to back proportional representation right now. So we don't know that he doesn't want it. We don't know that he does. I have no idea one way or the other. But we don't know that he doesn't want it, because it would be madness to formally back it now. But I did have another thought. So when I did this video, so the video I just did earlier today on potentially the Conservatives trying to break the House of Lords process again to help the Tories out for political reasons, thought did occur to me. So we do know that Starmer wants to abolish the House of Lords. I don't know exactly what's going to be in the Labour Party manifesto, but we do know that he himself is not a fan of the way the House of Lords works. And there is certainly an appetite in Labour and probably in the country to at least reform it, right? So how about this for an idea? So House of Lords is replaced with an elected second chamber, right? That way it can actually have an impact on legislation because it's elected. The House of Commons can't just force everything through it, right? It's elected, so it will be able to block legislation it doesn't agree with. Now, imagine this. You are going to make the House of Lords elected. There's no model for making it elected. Why wouldn't you just make it proportional representation? Why don't we have the replacement for the House of Lords a proportional representation? Because then all of the arguments against PR melt away. One of the arguments against PR, oh, you might not have an MP in your local area, which is nonsense anyway. I don't have an MP in my local area because it's a Tory MP. He's of no use to me. But that will go away because you'll still have a local MP. It'll be the one in the House of Commons. So they'll become regional lords, peers, whatever. They could change it. They could still keep the same names. But so you can introduce proportional representation on the sly, slowly starting to do it. Then you can start to think about introducing it for the House of Commons as well. But you'd still have some form of proportional representation in a chamber of our legislature. So that could be interesting. That could be interesting there. Jacob Rees-Mogg stated that he had a strong relationship with his nanny and saw no reason to change that. I considered he may have a point. Yeah, well, he can employ who he likes. It's absolutely fine. But the point is that what I mean is hardly anyone knows what a nanny is. You know, Jacob Rees-Mogg is of that sort of ilk that will have a nanny at some point in their lives. It's not normal to have it all the way through. And as I say, she's probably more like, you'd probably call her a personal assistant now. But hardly anyone in the country really is familiar with the term. So using the term is a nonsense. Mogg was candidate for Central Fife in 97. I didn't know that. One of the most economically deprived areas of Britain. He and his nanny didn't go down too well. Yeah, I can imagine. He removed PR from the party, but there's never been PR in the party. What are you on about? Also, the way you arrange things. In fact, Keir Starmer hasn't done anything to the party structure in terms of that. But the way you manage things in a party is completely different to in a country. Why is success measured in growth, not sustainability? Well, if you're clever as a politician, success is measured by whatever metric you can do best in. I used to say, I was beating my head against a wall. Like the last college I worked at full time, whenever it came time to advertise or anything, I used to despair at their advertising strategy. It was absolutely pants. And I used to keep saying to the principal, all you need, don't wall of text people aren't reading your shit. What you need is a leaflet with a simple graphic on it that says we are the best. Every other college does it, but they can't all be the best on one metric, so they all choose the metric on which they're best. We should do the same. I said to him, if we're the college with the most number of yellow walls, just put that down on top college for number of yellow. And it wasn't true, we were top for a few things, but it's the thing, you boast about what we're topping on whichever metric you do best in. So at the moment, you'd think the Tories wouldn't want it to be about growth, because they're not going to deliver growth. They should make it about something else. I'd have thought, if I was advising them, I'd make it about sovereignty, because you can't even measure that. I'd come up with some way of wangling a chart that shows us top for sovereignty somehow. But you whatever metric you're best at is what you should push. There's a wonderful picture of Boris Carey walking off a plane. The wider shot includes a nanny carrying a screaming child. Perfect metaphor. Yeah. Oh, he can afford a nanny, can he? I thought he couldn't afford a nanny on his prime ministerial salary. Probably got a donor to pay for it. Probably was a donor. The personal inflation rate of people on benefits is higher than the average. Well, it is, yes. It's not actually much higher, because there was, people who may know Jack Monroe, she's run a bit of a campaign to persuade the Office for National Statistics to consider different inflation rates. And they did that, fair play to them. They did do that. And they actually found out it's not as much different as you may imagine. It is different, of course. If inflation at the moment, which it is driven largely by the increasing cost of essentials, inevitably those with less will be more affected, because all of their money goes on essentials. They don't really have much, if anything, left over for anything else. But yeah, they did find, this is last year, it could be different. Or it was this year, but earlier this year, before the summer. Could be a bit different now, I suppose. But it was the case that it actually wasn't much different. Will Starmer go out of his way to cut newspaper editors or just not bother? I don't think he needs to bother. Let's be honest, and I've said this again recently, being honest, Keir Starmer has actually prosecuted newspaper editors. He's prosecuted them during the first phone hacking scandal. They don't like him at all. So if I actually see that as a good thing. I didn't actually enjoy. I understand the need to utilize the media, because the media is incredibly influential. I did think that Blair went, and I don't criticize doing everything you can to win every last vote. I don't ever want a leader to be complacent, but I do think he was he prioritized close relationships with editors and owners too highly. In a way, I'm quite glad that Starmer has a frosty relationship with some editors, because he'll write pieces for their papers and they'll publish them, but that's probably about it. I've not seen any sign as yet that he's getting close to obviously you'll get close to journalists, you need to in politics, but I've not seen any signs that there's a real charm offensive with editors themselves. And as I say, it's a little bit difficult, because what does he do? Does he go to them, I remember you, I had you up in the dock, didn't I put you away for 6 months? It's all in the past now. Not sure that works. And as I say, even if there's a particular editor they didn't prosecute, because he didn't prosecute all of them, they're all very chummy in journalism, so the editor, he may have put away one of their mates or one of their co-workers. So yeah, I don't think Starmer really has it in him to get a very close relationship like that with some editors. Blackouts affect every form of communication used today. They didn't used to affect landlines, they do now. Oh, mobiles will work. No, they won't, as mass needs power. Well, I don't know how much of our infrastructure will have generators. Like hospitals have generators. I know the government have been telling them to make sure that they've got their diesel tanks full. I don't know with phone masts. You would hope that they've got their own generators as well, because otherwise that would be a massive weakness in the system. So some infrastructure, and also blackouts don't necessarily, it's not like the whole country's in blackout. It can be just the odd street here or there. But we've actually had power cuts in our street over the summer a few times, but it's usually been for a few minutes. But they have been happening already this year. I've sometimes wondered if they did it deliberately to test. I have wondered if they're doing it to test, because I've only lived here since the pandemic, like 2020, so like 2.5 years now actually. But it's only recently in the last few months there've been power cuts, because I notice power cuts, my computer's on all the time basically. It's happened a few times this summer, but very briefly. So I have wondered if there's a bit of a test going on. Wouldn't an elected House of Lords just undermine Parliament? No, the House of Lords is part of Parliament, causing never-ending deadlocks. It might do. Is that a bad thing? That you need to get consensus? Is it a bad thing? Like, we're used in this country to having one party getting to do whatever it wants. Is that a great system? I'm not sure that's a great system. And I speak that as someone who is party political. Like, if you look at the polls, obviously the polls as they are now are not going to be like they are come the election. It's going to narrow. If you look at the last time Labour won power from the Conservatives, 1997, Labour did not have a 30-point gain on the Conservatives, but they did 2 years before. So a couple of years before the election, they were having 30-point leads, a little bit higher sometimes. And it came right down to, I forgot when it was now, but I think 18, just before the election. It was like, leading up to the election, it was about a 20-point lead. So that's probably where you want to aim to be. I know it's first past the post. It's not strictly speaking a particular size is what does it. But maintain a decent lead, 20 points, 15 to 20 points. But it did come down to 18 points, and that was a big majority for Labour. So you look at it at the moment, and it's like big. And I think to myself, obviously, as someone who is I'm not a pragmatic Labour supporter in that it's just the better of the options. I am actually a genuine Labour supporter, and so, yes, I want a majority Labour government, but even I would recognise the problem with having a Labour government that has too large a majority. Because consensus is useful in politics. It's useful. Not only does it then include more of the population. So let's say Labour win a large majority, 100 MPs, but it only gets 45% of the vote, maybe less. It's going to be making decisions based on a minority of voters, isn't it? That's not great. Whereas if it, with 45% of the vote, won a smaller majority, then it may have to form consensus with some parties to overrule their own rebels, and that includes therefore more of the voting population that's more democratic. So I do want them to get a majority, and I do want them to get a majority that means their rebels can't keep tripping them up. I don't want it to be too comfortable. I'd be uncomfortable with it being too comfortable. It's a little bit like me as a Newcastle United fan. I'm pleased they're winning more matches. I'm less pleased that it's because they were bought by a murderer. So, I don't want them having too much power. But anyway, what I think, one party should not have loads of power with not much of a vote, shouldn't be allowed to break manifestos that got into power in the first place. The thing is, in terms of breaking manifesto promises, there's no constitutional system you can put in to stop it other than relying on the decency of MPs to hold them to it. The reason is sometimes you'll have to break a manifesto promise. If, for example, you could have had a government very genuinely making manifesto promises that they intended to keep at the last election, winning. COVID comes along, obviously it's going to derail some of your plans. Okay, so unexpected events can always do that, right? So you do need that capacity in there to be flexible. What you have to do is rely on the fact that MPs will themselves insist that the manifesto is, as far as possible, followed. And that is unfortunately what we lack. And the main reason we lack that is because the media enable it. But I'll tell you something, Labour won't get away with it. It's only the Conservatives get away with it. Labour won't get away with it because the media will absolutely hold Labour to account. In fact, Labour will be hauled over the coals for sticking to their manifesto promises, but they will have the defence that it is there in their manifesto. Under first past the post system, don't Labour need a higher percentage of the vote to get majority than the Tories? No, it's just that traditionally the Tories are better at squeezing the vote where it's needed. They tend to have better campaigns. The strength of a success of a campaign in first past the post is winning lots of seats by a small margin. It's like you need to be very accurate at working out what support you've got. You only just if you're winning lots of seats by a large margin, then that's a waste. And if you pump more resources into it, then that is a waste. What you need to do is to target a lot of seats where you're just going to sneak it. You just win. That's what Boris Johnson did. He just won a load of seats, relatively small margins. Some of those red wall seats, it was a big swing, certainly. But most of that was not a large, some of them it was a big increase in Tory voters. Most of it was like a massive reduction in Labour voters. Like Boris Johnson won an extra 300,000 votes in 2019 compared to May in 2017, but Labour lost 2 million votes. A lot of the time that was the difference. House of Lords should be elected, in my opinion, as well as the House of Commons. So then the House of Commons can't force through bad stuff. Well, yeah, this is exactly what it is. If you have an elected second chamber, it may cause deadlocks, and they could be party political deadlocks. But if you have a proportionally representative chamber, and there's no reason not to, if you're having a completely new chamber, what is the argument against PR for it? None at all. I just think major reform, even if Starmer doesn't get behind proportional representation, which will disappoint people, it'll disappoint me, there's still the scope for it. There is still the scope for starting it out. And that's what I mean. We go back to that question, how can we push Starmer? What you need to do, you can't push Starmer into adopting a position that he believes is a vote loser, because that would be madness. I wouldn't want to push him into a vote losing position, even for a policy. PR for me is the most important policy any government can enforce right now. The most important reform that we need, because everything else that I want flows from it. But if there's, so it's a case of, well, if he thinks it's a vote loser, or if he thinks there'll be too much resistance to it, is there another way to introduce it? Yes, there is. In a way that you don't have to. All he has to do is talk about reform of the House of Lords in the manifesto. That can be it. And then when it comes into it, you can say, right, we're abolishing all the hereditary peers, all of the politically appointed peers. In 2 years' time, we're going to have an election run on proportional representation, regional proportional representation party lists, and then that's how we'll have the next. So the peers that are in there at the moment, you're all gone, and we'll get some proper ones in, democratically elected ones, and get them to do the same job. Get them to do the same job. I don't think he will go that far, I have to say, because it will massively constrain the power of the government. But something like it is possible. It is possible. I said in the past my relatives were Tory. Yeah, my parents. I assume not this bunch of crazies. Yeah, probably not. Although I don't know. I don't discuss politics with my dad. The Tories are currently not following any of the manifesto promises they still to get them in government. No, not the ones to get them in government. They are following the manifesto promises that mean diminishing democracy, but not the ones that they promised to get them in government, absolutely. Other than, you know, leaving the EU, they did do that. But anyway, what was this? I've missed something. What happens if Labour wipe out the Tories in England and Wales, but the SNP wipe out everyone in Scotland? Well, nothing. I mean, it's not going to happen. The Tories, I think it's fair to say, are going to be wiped out in Scotland. Even if, I mean, never mind the situation now. Even if, I mean, the polls recently have shown a big increase in support for Labour as well. Some of it at the cost of the SNP. So some of us are going to have arguments about that. But it's, I don't expect the Tories to carry on with this lunacy for another 2 and a bit years. I fundamentally can't believe it. It's, you know, the problem is I just don't know what they can do. I'm going to have to discuss that in a video because and that's going to keep coming up as a topic, because everywhere I look, it's like the Tories must do something. They've got to change something, but everywhere they go, it's basically like where the Tories are right now is they're told that, you know, they're in a room with a time bomb that's going to tick down and blow them to smithereens, and they've got several doors to choose from to get away, but every door has a wild animal behind it, and they don't know which wild animal it is, and they also know that it doesn't matter what sort of wild animal it is, they've still got a fight on their hands when they go through the door. They're trapped in that sort of situation, so they're trying to put their ear to each door, trying to wonder which is the tiger and which is just the very irate porcupine. And so yeah, but whatever they do, surely they're wiped out in Scotland. Not necessarily Wales. There's still bits of Wales, and obviously they'll win some seats in England. They'll probably win lots of seats in England. You know, but they could easily be restricted to 200 seats. That would be a disaster enough for them. I know it's still better than they're on for at the moment. Even Baker's shifting his position, the writing's on the wall. Yeah, I'm still a bit suspicious about what he's up to, you know. Old Steve Baker. He's been having arguments with people like David Frost as well. The Brexiteers are arguing with each other. Proper little barn he's having. Little barbs in the media. As long as Mad Liz is the PM, the crazy will continue. Well, she is crazy. Like I said, you know, I didn't quite know what to make of her before she became Prime Minister. It was really difficult. Is she one of the mad ones or just pretending? Yeah, she's mad. She's mad. In a way that's really clear to see. Dominic Cummings was absolutely on the ball and telling the truth, what's more. She is crazy. Utterly mental. You don't like arguments. I'm fundamentally conflict avoidant. Oh, I'm not. Anyway, just don't join. So I don't know what I missed, but I'm wondering if you think that a lot of the problem with Liz and Kwasi is they're drunk with power, along with their master's agenda, of course. No, I don't even think it's either of those. I actually think they genuinely thought they had a plan. I think they've, you know, like anyone in politics, okay, there's different people in politics. There are some people in politics just to be on the gravy train. They don't have any great ambition. They're quite happy being a backbench MP. Be nice if they could get a ministerial position, bit more money, you know what I mean, a bit more cred. But ultimately they don't really have much ambition. They may be hard working, they may work hard, or they may not, but they don't. And then you've got some who are really driven. You know, they're really driven, not always for good reasons, but they are driven to change the world, right? They've got ideas. And the problem is these people tend to be confident, arrogant, call it what you like. And people in that position get fixed on their mindset, and they never change it when circumstances change or when someone challenges it. They just shut it out and they know what they're doing. And you have someone like Truss and Kwarteng, who for years in politics have thought every time they've watched their own party or a different party do something, it's not worked out brilliantly, they've thought that's because they're not doing this, they should do this, if they did this it worked, if they did this, we've got the answers, why isn't anyone listening to us? And then finally they've been given this chance, and they haven't thought to themselves, are the economic conditions right for us to try this? They've just thought, this is our shot, we're doing it, oblivious to the political and economic realities, because ultimately, although they're confident that they knew what to do, they were wrong. And if at any point it was ever possible to put into place what they wanted to do and get away with it, during a cost of living crisis and a global recession was not the time. Baker's seat is unlikely to keep in place. Yeah, Baker's almost certainly gone as well. I mean, it was already vulnerable before Boris Johnson went. Like I say, although I can't see them keeping Truss, I do think she'll stay for a bit, because they've really got to think about what they do to get rid of her. You know, who replaces her? There are MPs who will be thinking, if we end up just replacing her for Rishi Sunak, then we're not improving the situation. There are MPs who think if we just replace her for Boris Johnson, we're not improving the situation. You know, so there's difficulties in getting rid of her, which is why I think at the moment what MPs would like is to get rid of Kwarteng, blame him, because ultimately the main problem with Truss at the moment is economic. You know, although she's got some other batshit crazy ideas, they are not themselves causing a problem, either for the country or the politics, the optics. It's the economics at the moment that's the problem. Get rid of Kwarteng, blame him, get Truss to change tack. That'll be their first plan. Have you missed anything important? Yes, maybe. But you can watch it later. But there we are. Labour will stay roughly where they are now with one MP until they support Scotland's right to... Oh, yeah, behave yourself. No. Right. In 2019, Labour did not help themselves by being the soft Brexit party. If people wanted to vote for Brexit, they voted for the Tories or for the Brexit party. In Scotland, Labour do not win votes by being a shit, soft separatist party. There's already a separatist party, the SNP. Labour is a unionist party. It's not just for strategic purposes, it is a unionist party. Absolute madness to try and be anything else. Why would they? Oh, you'll just be a shit version of the SNP? Who's going to vote for that? No. Labour are in competition with the SNP. And they need to, just like in England and Wales, they're in competition with the Conservatives, and they need to distinguish themselves from the Conservatives. They do the same thing with the SNP in Scotland. They're not in competition with the Conservatives in Scotland. If they nick some Conservative votes, that's only to help them try and beat the SNP. Have I ever read The Sovereign Individual by William Rees-Mogg? No, I've seen bits of it, of course. I've seen like analyses of it, but I've not actually read the book, I have to say, no. I've been on Ilkley Moor about that. Yeah, that's the Yorkshire anthem, by the way, for people who don't know. I got accused of being from Scunthorpe recently. I think they missed the fact that I just lived there for a bit. what happens if the party wins the election but the leader loses their seat? Is a very good question. If there's a system in place for a deputy leader, then they would become the prime minister in the first instance, and then they would have two options. First option is that someone in a safe seat resigns it, probably, you know, for the promise of a seat in the House of Lords, and then the leader takes part in the by-election, and then if they win that by-election, if it's a safe seat, they should do, then you have a change of prime minister. It's all very embarrassing. It's deeply embarrassing, but that is one thing you could do. The second thing you could do, if the party decide that that leader was a bit shit and they deserve to lose their seat, you just have a leadership contest. So, you know, there are, and then your deputy sort of becomes the interim prime minister while that contest goes on. Obviously, Labour at the moment have a system for that because they have a deputy leader. Although it would have gone a bit wrong in 2019. If we imagine, if let's say Labour had won, but Corbyn had lost it, I mean, fat chance it was a safe seat. But let's say, then they would have been knackered because their deputy leader then had stepped down. But generally speaking, Labour have a system in place for that. The Tories don't, although realistically they have had a deputy. Like Theresa Coffey is Liz Truss's deputy, Dominic Raab was Boris Johnson's deputy, but there's nothing in the party constitution that says they have to have a deputy. But that is what would happen, one of those two things. It would all depend on how much the party wanted to get that leader there, retain them as prime minister. Why am I so averse to discussing the Al Jazeera investigation of the Labour Party? I'm not, I just hadn't read it before. I have now, and it's all bullshit, as I suspected. Basically, what it is, you've got Al Jazeera are very good for some things, but at the end of the day, they are an anti-Semitic outlet. And the files that you're referring to were just the ones that were put together by Corbynites to try and pretend that he was undermined. Basically, what happened was Corbyn and his supporters couldn't take the fact that they were absolutely trounced in the 2019 general election. They couldn't take it because that would mean that the country turned against them. How can the country turn against us? Because we want the, you know, we're on the side of the people. They can't take it. So they had to come up with some system of sabotage. But the thing is, it makes no sense because what they're claiming is that it was sabotaged by the people who were working for Labour for the 2017 general election, which they nearly won, but not the 2019 general election. So it makes no sense. But that's what they are, because I have now looked at what they are. That's what they are. They're just files that were put together by Corbyn supporters to try and present this view that he was undermined. It's bollocks. The Ford report properly considered all the available evidence and said, no, it was fucking chaos under sorry, my language. It was just chaos under Corbyn. Oh, bugger. Will YouTube screw me? No, they won't. They'll be fine. They'll be cool. But anyway, don't normally swear like that. I don't like to bring this up. I like to basically just let sleeping dogs lie to a certain extent. But like Diane Abbott has literally this week, like you look at the situation when you want to know who's really Labour. Labour right now are storming it. 30 point lead. Well, it changes depending on which part. In some polling companies, it's just over 20 points. For some, it's about 30. But the point is, it's a big lead over the Conservatives, whoever you ask. And, you know, the Conservatives are collapsing. Labour are doing really well. Keir Starmer's approval rating is way higher than Liz Truss's. And you know, being honest, again, the age-old problem with Keir Starmer is he's not charismatic. He doesn't enthuse people. You know, there's a lot of people not really sure about him on a personal level. But it doesn't seem to matter because they still prefer him over anyone else. And yet Diane Abbott has decided to use this week to attack Labour and Starmer. And what she's decided to attack them with is by saying, do you know what? Starmer never actually personally apologised to me for what Jeremy Corbyn's staff said about me. Because she's thrown this example of what some of Jeremy Corbyn's staff said about it. It was, if it's true, disgraceful. I don't actually know it is true, but if it is, absolutely disgraceful. And we know that Diane Abbott has been subject to quite a lot of racial and sexual abuse in her time. But she's blaming Keir Starmer for it when Jeremy Corbyn was the boss of these people, not Keir Starmer. So all of it is an absolute nonsense. It is an attempt, because I'll tell you, so it's an attempt to do two things. These people, first of all, fundamentally cannot accept that they messed up. Just like Truss and Kwarteng now cannot accept they messed up. Who are they blaming? The media, Tory rebels. The same as Jeremy Corbyn and his crew. Who did they blame? The media and the rest of the Labour Party. It's the same thing. It's people who were just shit, and they can't accept the fact that they were just shit, and so they go off on one, and they're actually trying to derail the next Labour government as well. They don't want Labour to win, because that just emphasises their shitness. They want Labour to lose. They want the Conservatives in power because they need someone of their ilk to be in charge before they want to win. Until they've got someone that they approve of, their clique, in charge of the Labour Party, they will want Labour to lose every single time. And that's what these people are like, and I can't be doing with them. But at the moment, it's... the wheel keeps turning around in Labour, but for the moment they've been sidelined, so I don't really want to bring them up a lot. Out of interest, how long has Scotland wanted to separate from the UK? For many years has it started since they understand? We don't know that Scotland does want to separate right now. The polls are always sort of like, at the moment, over the last year, the polls have generally been suggesting that they don't. Before that they do, and it might be that if Truss drops an absolute bollock in the next year, it may tilt back the other way. Obviously there was a rebellion in the early days of the Union, like a few decades after the Union formed. There was the Jacobite rebellion, which was led by an Italian. There's always, it's not like 100% of people in Scotland were in favour of the Union right from the start. And remember, the people weren't even consulted when the Union formed, because we didn't have democracy then, not a proper democracy in either Scotland, England, or anywhere else, or in around the UK anyway. So we don't actually know. But in terms of like increased support for it, obviously since Brexit has fundamentally, and the Tories and Brexit have fundamentally created a divide. And and if you want to know how it's happened, you need look no further than the Eurovision Song Contest venue decision. So it's between Glasgow and Liverpool, right? Liverpool won. Reaction. Nicola Sturgeon said, "Congratulations, Liverpool, you're going to do us and Ukraine proud." Right? That was her reaction. I immediately saw two Tories saying, "Oh, isn't it brilliant news? Liverpool won. I bet Nicola Sturgeon stewing over this." And it's like, who are the real so Nicola Sturgeon there saying brilliant, and it's you're going to do us proud, right? These people are just trying to create divisions. Chris Rose and Stuart Pearce, was it, or Andrew Pearce? I can never remember. Some of those dickheads, and all they want to do is stoke division. So who are the real people trying to drive a wedge between Scotland and England? It's not actually the SNP. The SNP just want Scotland to be a different country. They don't want to drive a wedge. They just want to be a different country on very good terms with their neighbours. This isn't like, they're not like a Scottish equivalent of Sinn Féin. It's a fundamentally different situation. Whereas, there's people in the Tory party and around the right wing of politics, even if it's not in the Tory party, that they're not unionists. They're constantly trying to drive a wedge. They're doing more for the idea of the UK breaking up than anyone in the SNP. But anyway, I'm ranting on and on, aren't I? Hi, Assign. Just joined the channel. Love the work. Been a lurker for a long time. Finally decided to join. Welcome. But anyway. Do I think in the next general election with Labour being resurgent, they'll manage to take some seats in Scotland as well? Yeah, they will. They'll take some seats. The SNP will still presumably... See, it could be very interesting. We still need to wait to find out what happens with the Supreme Court case this year. All sorts of interesting things could happen there. So, but if we just consider... So the SNP's plan C, remember, is if the Supreme Court rules that they can't issue a referendum, the SNP have said that they will fight the next general election, Westminster general election, on a single platform of an independence referendum. So they have said that they're not going to campaign on any other policies. They will campaign on that. Their manifesto will basically be one line. We want another referendum on independence. That'll be it. That'll be their manifesto. That's what they claim. So every vote for an SNP, unlike last time, is a vote specifically for, not for independence necessarily, but an independence referendum. Now, that would open the door for a resurgent Labour to... I mean, the polling at the moment would indicate that they would win a few more seats. But as I say, the polling at the moment is not what the polling's going to be then. So you'd certainly expect Labour to win some more. It's not going to win loads more, because fundamentally I don't think people are disappointed with the even though the SNP's Westminster seats don't do anything for Scotland directly. That's the Holyrood seats, and it's perfectly possible to, if you're happy with the SNP in government, to vote for the SNP in Holyrood elections and Labour in the Westminster elections. And the hope will be that a lot of people choose to do that. If Labour's line in Scotland at the moment is, why vote for the SNP and hope for a Labour government? Just vote Labour and get one. That's their line at the moment. But it'll all be quite interesting. We'll see what happens. But there you go. Truss, Sturgeon's just an attention seeker. Yeah. I mean, again, lines like that, when Sturgeon, and you can criticise her. I can criticise her. But at the end of the day, she is a stateswoman. She behaves properly as a First Minister, as a head of government. I can't fault her the way she conducts herself as a politician. I can criticise some policies. I can criticise some dodgy politics, but at the same time, it's effective politics. I can call out some bullshit. But what I can't do is say that she's not behaving in a proper manner as First Minister. Whereas I can absolutely say that about Liz Truss. She is a disgrace. If Scotland becomes independent, I'm hoping they'll annex Northumbria and take us back to Europe. See, you won't need to. I think Northumbria would... I think most of the north of England, if it came to a choice, would happily join Scotland. But I've actually suggested this in the past, and you get a load of people who are in favour of Scottish independence in Scotland going, no, we don't want you. Because the north of England, of course, has way more people living in it than Scotland. So actually, if it was... Like, here's the thing. That Jacobite rebellion I talked about in the 18th century did actually conquer the north of England. If they hadn't got cold feet, we could have almost had a situation where Scotland was what is Scotland now and the north of England. They went past Doncaster, where I grew up. I could have been Scottish. So, but there are difficulties with Scottish independence, which the SNP still haven't got to grips with. They've recently been criticised because they still haven't worked out what they're going to do for money. But I could also criticise them. They haven't worked out what they're going to do about trade borders either. But anyway, these are all problems for later. But there you go. We have run out of time. I'll just see if there's another couple of questions I need to get down to. Leaked Tory internal poll shows, I'm not sure if I've seen this, 72% for the right to choose. Scottish Labour members polls 30% support right to choose, 57 against, the rest don't know. I'm not sure I've seen that. Like to think of Labour as a broad church, but perhaps some of these people need to consider forming their own party. Even so, I'm still happy with them to say otherwise. It's their choice. All parties have to be, even the SNP is a broad church. There's quite a lot of different views in the SNP, and it's because it's the only way to form a government. I suppose in any system it's advantageous if you can cobble different groups together into one large party, but in first past the post there's no way out of it. First past the post, you have to appeal to a wide range. You get nowhere otherwise. I am Scottish, I just don't know. Well, I'm not sure. I have got Scottish relatives, but in terms of I've actually been on the old Ancestry website earlier this year. And actually, when it comes to it, although I have got Scottish relatives, I did wonder, as far as I can tell, in terms of direct lines of descendancy, there's not a hint of it. It's all over England. Although, interestingly, my dad's granddad, so my great-grandfather on my dad's side, you can't go before him because he came from a workhouse. He was like an orphan or abandoned, whatever. But he came from a workhouse, so it's not actually possible to trace his parents. So who knows? Maybe they were from Scotland. Don't know. But no, as far as I can tell from my direct line of descendancy, can't find anything in Scotland, actually. Can Scotland do any worse by being independent under Truss and having quasi rule? Yeah, but that's the thing. That's short-termism, isn't it? Then that's not going to last forever. It's not even going to last a year, let's be honest. Even the Tories aren't going to last forever. And the Tories at the moment are being so egregious. They're behaving with such disregard for even basic political principles that every now and then in any country's history there comes a real fundamental shift in politics and the old order is swept away. Now, I'm not going to suggest that the Conservative Party will be swept away. I fundamentally think there's too much money behind it, too much will of very clever, wealthy, organised people behind it. But there can be significant shifts in what the public will accept. And it could well be a very interesting time over the next few years. It may not. It may not. It may be we just get another 10 years of Labour and the Tories come back in and the whole shit show starts again. But you do get a feeling we might be in for some interesting times in the next few years. Just like we've had interesting times over the last few years, but not in a good way. We may be heading for better times. And then I'll have basically nothing to rant about and the channel will decline. Who knows? But we'll have to call it there, I'm afraid. We'll be back on again next week, I think. I'm just coming to check here. Yeah, we'll be back on next week, but not the week after because that's when I'm in London, or around about this time in 2 weeks trying to escape London. Hopefully I will have sort of escaped if it's still on my way back. But anyway, thanks very much for coming on, everyone. Have a good evening, and until next time, I will see you later.